So in today's video, I'm going to discuss about how to read a research paper thoroughly. So in a previous video, I outlined how you can read a paper quickly, and so you can come up with a final small set of papers which you shall read in much greater detail before embarking on your own research. Now if we look at it, you again go through the paper and you start with the introduction section. But this time you read the complete introduction, and at the end of various sentences in the introduction you will encounter a reference. So what you should do at this point is go to the end of the paper, look at the reference, look at who has published that particular reference and what is the publisher of that particular reference, that is, what is the journal where that reference has been published. So as you do this, you will start getting a background about the time history of the papers which have been published in the past, and also about who are the main researchers in the field and where are these papers being published in terms of the journals. So now as you go through the whole introduction, if the paper is well written, the writer will bring out the problem he's trying to solve. He'll try to put that problem in perspective with the research which has taken place in the field, and at the end of the introduction he will try to motivate what he is trying to do in the paper. So basically at the end of the introduction, what you can do is you can write a small summary about what you learned from the introduction and what are the possible gaps in the literature which you found after reading that part of the paper. So now when you come to the second part of the paper, which is the method section, now again you read this entire method section. And what will happen is there are two possible types of papers you may encounter. There are experimental papers and theoretical or computational papers. In the case of experimental papers, take a careful look at the various diagrams and pictures they have provided for the experiments, as well as the discussions they have done about the experimental methods, as well as the statistical analysis which they plan to do. For a computational paper, you need to go through the equations and check out whether you know these equations, whether you can follow the derivations and so on. So in many cases of papers in computational mechanics or computational mathematics, you have the method section which is very detailed and somewhat abstruse in nature. So you will need to go through this part in great detail, and you may also need to refer back to your textbooks or reference books and past literature to see the different equations which are given and check out if these equations are correctly placed in the paper. So just because something is given in a paper, do not take it for granted that it is correct. So now at the end of method section also, I will suggest that you summarize the method section and write a few points about this method section in a small paragraph. Then you go to the results and discussion section, and again you read this section in detail. And here you need to bring out what exactly is the system this person is trying to study, and then go through the various parametric studies or the experimental results or the computational and numerical results and the graphs and the tables and so on. Now as you go through all these results, you should try to follow the reasoning which the writer has given and see how he has come up with the various discussion points in the paper and what has he exactly learned from those results. So one of the things about reading the results and discussion sections of a paper is you also learn how to write this results and discussion section, because this section is more of an art than a science, and there is a certain way of packaging this discussion together which makes a paper good. So again, you will learn with practice how people write a good results and discussion section, and so going through this part in detail will help you here. Now of course then you go through the conclusion section and the reference section, and at the end of this time you would have read the paper. Now this process may take you a lot of time. It may take you one day or more. So what I typically do is I break these reading of the paper problem into a set of sub problems. That is, you go through it by section. So you may set aside some time for the different sections. You start in the morning, then you take a coffee break, then you read one more section, then you take a lunch break, you read one more section, maybe take a tea break, and then one more section, like that. So basically within 1 or 2 days you can finish reading a paper. Now the problem happens when there is a very abstruse and mathematically dense formulation or method section, in which case it can take you 2 to 3 days to actually figure out all the equations and the mathematics which have been given. And in some cases, if there are papers in mathematics, you may need to derive all these equations to check the results, because most of the paper may be the derivations and there may be very less results for such papers. So again, in those cases the method section can take a lot of time, and in fact the method section becomes a very large component of the paper itself. So again, like I said, for each of these sections you can write a small paragraph about what you have learned, and at the end you can compile all this material into a one-page write-up, or you can write it out in a Word document and then you can save it with yourself. So again, when you do this, you make sure that you have paraphrased all the points and you have written them in your own word. So this particular one-page write-up which you have written about the paper will be very useful for you down the stage when you write your literature survey or your thesis. Now one more point to remember is that this particular task which you are doing, this can take a lot of time. So don't be cautious about time for this particular problem, and give yourself as much time as you need for this problem. So at the end of this particular reading of the paper, you will have a very good concept about the paper, and you should be able to now critique the paper. So basically, when you first read a paper, you want to read it in a non-judgmental manner. But once you have read a paper, I would probably suggest you take a second reading of the paper after a few days. And when you look at the paper for the second time, this time try to critique the paper and exactly see what's wrong with the paper. And this black hat thinking will bring out some good concepts in your mind about what are the possible lacunas in the paper which you can fulfill in your future research. So that's a technique which takes some time to develop, and once you develop that, you will be much more successful in terms of research. So that's something I had for today. So I'll see you in my next video. Thank you.